Okay. All right, so welcome to our second session of Tuesday Talks with Alumni. Some of you have joined us previously for our first session last Tuesday with Dr. Sarah Messbauer. Some of you may be joining us for the first time, so I want to just quickly give an introduction to the program and what the program is designed to do, as well as introduce myself, and then we will introduce our guest speaker for today. A couple of additional housekeeping items just before I start. So we have live transcription for this meeting. It may already be enabled, but if it's not, all you need to do is go ahead and click on the bottom to where the live transcription button, and you should be able to get the caption on the bottom of your screen. Okay, and then the other thing too is we're just going to ask throughout the presentation that for now you keep yourselves muted. But there will be an opportunity to ask questions. This is designed to be pretty engaging. And during that time, we'll ask you to either unmute yourself and ask your question aloud or to put your question in the chat. Okay, so I'm Jillian, and I'm a PhD candidate in sociology, and I'm also the graduate student advisor to the Dean and Chancellor, which just means that I serve as an advocate on behalf of graduate and professional students here at UC Davis. And I meet with campus leadership in order to bring graduate student questions and concerns to the campus leadership team. So the Tuesday Talk with Alumni series was actually developed as part of my GSADC project in collaboration with key grad studies staff, and that includes Jessica Failer-Ward, who's joining us on the call today. It's a spring quarter series that's designed to provide graduate students an opportunity to informally connect with advanced degree alumni who have successfully navigated graduate school at UC Davis and who come from diverse academic fields and professional backgrounds. So after today's talk, we'll actually have 6 more sessions during the rest of the month of April and throughout the month of May. In a moment, I'll be sure to drop the link in the chat for the rest of the Tuesday Talk sessions. Okay, so without further ado, I'm excited to introduce today's speaker, who'll be giving a presentation on the academic job search. So Dr. Lindenfeld serves as Vice Provost for Academic and Strategic Planning, Dean of Communication and Journalism, and Executive Director of the Alan Alda Center for Communicating Science at Stony Brook University. Previously, she served as Professor of Communication and Director of the Margaret Chase Smith Policy Center at the University of Maine. As a scholar and a leader, Dr. Lindenfeld is deeply dedicated to supporting growth and innovation in higher education. Dr. Lindenfeld holds a PhD in Cultural Studies from the University of California, Davis. As a communication researcher, her work draws inspiration from the idea that we can make better, more informed choices about how we shape our collective future. Her research focuses on how we can advance meaningful, productive interactions with communities, stakeholders, and decision makers by strengthening linkages between knowledge and action. Much of Dr. Lindenfeld's research has focused specifically on environmental and sustainability communication. She has sought to help us understand how we can support effective stakeholder engagement, build strong interdisciplinary teams, and communicate science more effectively. Her leadership of the ALDA Center has helped to realize that vision. The center has trained over 15,000 scientists worldwide and introduced over 50,000 people to the ALDA method. The center provides international leadership in conducting and connecting research and practice to advance clear science and medical communication. She also spent a good portion of her career as an academic studying food, movies, and culture, and she loves to cook and eat. Thank you so much, Dr. Lindenfeld, for being our guest speaker today. And I'm going to ask the crowd to virtually help me in welcoming Dr. Lindenfeld. Thank you. And feel free to take it away.
Warm round of clapping applause. By the way, feel free. I know some of you are eating lunch. It's a little bit later here in New York. It's 3 o'clock and chillier. I think it's in the upper 50s. I probably have weather envy when it comes to those of you in California. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I'd love to make this interactive because there's nothing worse than staring at yourself on a camera for an hour. And I've decided to do this without slides. So I need your help. The first thing I'm going to ask you is if you could either post in a chat or if you're willing to turn on your camera at some point and share what are your biggest concerns about the academic job market? Maybe put a few things in the chat because I'd like to speak to things that matter to you and that you're concerned about. Are you concerned about not getting a job? Are you concerned about getting the wrong job? So I'm going to do a little bit of background on my own trajectory just because I think the academic job market, there's not one market. There's many, many different markets and institutions handle the process differently. So I'm gonna, not enough jobs available, not enough opportunities, work-life balance. Oh, I'm a bad one to talk about that. I can try. All right, these are great. Okay, keep them coming. I'm gonna try to go back through. So first, I thought it might be helpful if I just shared a little bit about my own trajectory and history and how I wound up where I wound up from Davis, which was an amazing place to do a PhD. I left Davis when I was still a graduate student, and it took me 3 years to complete my dissertation. Don't try this at home. If you can finish at Davis or wherever you are, do it. Because once you get out and you start taking on another job, it's very easy to get sidetracked and derailed. Long story short, love brought me from UC Davis. I got engaged with my now husband, Roger Scher, who was an entomology PhD student, and he wound up studying the Colorado potato beetle in Maine, which was quite a change for a New York girl who had lived in California. So we go to Maine. I thought we'll be there for a year, and I wound up spending 16 years at the University of Maine and moving through being a research professor to going on tenure track to then being promoted to full professor and then becoming director of a policy center, public policy center. And each time I had to apply for those jobs within the institution. So I have this very interesting history of being on the academic job market, having been at an institution and applied twice, two different times, once for the tenure track position and once for the director of the center. And then as I got into directing this public policy center, I had been connected with the Alan Alda Center for Communicating Science. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to hold a few moments toward the end. The Alda Center is pretty unique. It's pretty wonderful. We were at Davis a few years ago and ran some trainings there. It's really neat. We use theater improv to help scientists communicate effectively. And yes, Alan Alda, the actor, is very involved in the center. But I got encouraged to apply for this job, and it was a really huge leap. And I thought, am I going to leave my job that I had? I was at Maine for 15 years at that point. It was the 16th year. My husband had a tenure track job there. Am I going to leave Maine and potentially go to New York, where I'm from? So the irony is I wound up back where Jillian and I were just talking this before, where I left when I was 5 years old and I wound up back here 2 miles from Cousins, which is kind of nice. And I like being back in New York. But I applied for and got that job as a director. I can go into any of the details of any of these jobs. Got here, took this job, and then within a few years, the provost came to me and he said, we're going to need a new dean in the School of Communication because the dean is stepping down. Would you consider throwing your cards in? So I went through a kind of internal search here at Stony Brook University, where the Alda Center is housed, and became dean of the School of Journalism, which over the last year, we renamed the School of Communication and Journalism. And then just because there's never a dull moment, COVID hit, and we had an interim president and an interim provost, and things were getting very, very challenging in the Provostale area. And I raised my hand and I said, can I help? Can I help with communications? Can I help with anything? So I wound up getting added to my list of names. It's too long to go on one business card, and I probably need to make a choice at some point, Vice Provost for Academic and Strategic Planning. So I still have all three of those titles, Vice Provost, Dean, and Executive Director. So I'm going to speak a little bit about the academic job market, both from a position as someone who applied and got a job as a faculty member at a smaller Research One institution, but then applied for an administrative position. And I have to tell you, when I look back on my own history and how I wound up where I wound up, a lot of the skills that I got in graduate school and that I was able to hone at Davis, because it was, I think, such a wonderful experience and a unique one, enabled me to get there. And I realized that in hindsight. So, again, if you have questions about this, please, you can hold them for the end or post them in the notes here and we can cover them. So let me just take a minute and look at what you've posted here to think about how I'm going to arrange. I have some high level feedback, and then I wanted to dig into some of the issues that you're posting here. So give me one sec. All right. I wish we could cue music. So it looks to me like not enough opportunities, not enough jobs, work life, needing high profile publications to get a job, not finding a job or not finding a tenure track job, being stuck in precarious employment forever. It's a genuine concern, I will say. It's not applied to industry, work life balance, not enough jobs, temporary positions, getting job tougher for international students. Hopefully that is going to get a little better in a post-COVID environment. All right. So I'm seeing a couple of themes in here. And let me start with the first one, and that is not enough jobs. Um, First of all, let me give you some high level thoughts as someone who hires. I think if you get wrapped up in the worry about there not being enough jobs, you might very well position yourself not to get one. um, I think there are a lot of different jobs out there, and when I was in grad school many moons ago, back in the Stone Ages, people did talk about alternative careers. I think that you're in a fortunate position where this is more of the conversation now than it was, and I would not by any stretch eliminate a non-academic job, but I also would not throw an academic job out of the possibilities just because you think there might not be enough. So I'm at an AAU school now. I never anticipated. I thought I might wind up at a teaching institution. Sometimes I look and I'm like, how did I wind up becoming a dean and a vice provost at a really well ranked, excellent school in the Northeast where I want to live? And there's many ways to get to that vision. It's not how I started out. I started out writing a lot of grants and demonstrating that I could publish and building up enough of a portfolio and being part of an institution that valued me and wanted to keep me. And they actually made the line for me. So that's a way of saying there are many, many ways to create a pathway for yourself that is productive, dynamic, and rewarding. And you don't necessarily know where you're going to wind up. I think those are some of the most interesting careers. So the first thing I want to say to you before we get into some of these concerns is, de- depending on what level you're at, if you're, a first year or second year PhD student, maybe you spend some time not worrying so much about the job market, but thinking about your field and getting immersed in various activities that are going to put you on the trajectory to be marketable. Um, as you get closer, I think look at the literature that's out there. There are books. I mean, I didn't even make a list. I'm happy to share some with you after this talk. Inside Higher Ed, the Chronicle, there are features, there are blogs. Every conference in every field has people talking about the job market. Pardon me. And within your field, finding a job in physics is going to be really different than finding a job in computer science or in English or communication, because each of those job markets have their own parameters. So I would look both at the broader literature on how do you position yourself for a job, and some of this formula: strong teaching portfolio, excellent research. I would throw one of the things I think stands out when I look at people's portfolios as an ability to demonstrate that you have some experience with grant writing and, if even possible, fundraising. If you have an opportunity to engage in such activities, I would. It's no surprise, I'm sure, to any of you that, especially with COVID, and I've been at state institutions my entire life. Davis is land grant, sea grant institution, that funding can be really tight depending on what's happening with state budgets. So if you can demonstrate an ability to bring in resources or be resourceful, that that really could help depending on the job. But then again, it depends. So look at this literature, avail yourself of these books, follow some blogs, but don't let it get you too worried about what may or may not be out there. You just don't know where you're going to find a good fit. So let's talk about that for a sec. Um, I've hired people as a dean, I've hired people as a director, I've run search committees as a colleague. I just had the privilege of chairing the vice president for advancement. We have president, you guys have chancellor search for Stony Brook last week. So I get to see this whole spectrum of hiring. And I'm going to speak from that position, knowing that I have a particular position within this and my previous institution where I got to experience that. And there are rules at each of these different campuses. If you're at a state system like State University of New York, SUNY, there's some particularities to the process that you may not know if you're applying in that system. So the first thing is, obviously, you have to be a good fit for a job. Don't apply for a job that you're not qualified for. It's like a grant. Don't apply for a grant that you really can't meet the metrics and call for, or you're going to wind up, they're going to do a quick sort and put you on that pile of applications that doesn't meet the mark. So when you look at a job, look at it and see, number one, do I really meet the qualifications for this job? And number two, do I want this job? Am I excited about it? I would probably encourage you to think about applying for fewer jobs, but being very strategic about which ones you apply for. Applying for 100 jobs and then not being as prepared if you get an interview is not going to land you that job. So you've got to think about that whole trajectory from putting in your application letter, to potentially getting letters from letter writers, which is work for them. So you want to be strategic about those, to being prepared for first, second, and potentially third round interviews, meeting with different constituents, and really being able to demonstrate alignment with an interest in that position. So that's my first piece of advice, is really make sure that you want to apply for that job and that you're qualified for it. And once you do that, align your letter to that position. There are going to be other people with the same number of publications, possibly grant experience, teaching. It's almost like when you sometimes we see jobs where we'll have 80 to 100 applicants, and it's really hard for committees to sort through those. So you want to write letters because that's going to be your introduction, unless you know someone in there and they're going to pay particular attention to your letter. They're really not supposed to do that. They're supposed to treat them all the same. One way or another, you want your letter to stand out and be really clear. So I would encourage you to think about having other people read your letters and cross-check it against the qualifications for that specific job. So again, if you think about, maybe you're applying for 20 jobs rather than 100, don't let your panic seize you, is what I'm saying. Don't let that get in the way, because you may be losing out on a potentially fabulous opportunity for yourself by not putting the time in to the letters and the package that you need to. I just sat yesterday, we're interviewing candidates for a leadership position here, and I sat in on an interview, and I'm just shaking my head like, did this person do their homework on Stony Brook University? Do they understand this job? And I was just checked out within a few minutes, because I didn't think they really understood the job and what was needed in it, versus someone who comes on even in Zoom and they've done their homework, and you can understand they haven't set foot on this campus. They're probably applying for a number of jobs, but they've really looked at what is the position and what are we asking that person to bring to the position? What does the organization need? So take your time to do that and address it in the letter. I'm going to share something technical with you that some institutions do. And I don't know if you're familiar with this, but some HR offices have a software that check to make sure that you meet the qualifications in the way you address the letter. And if you don't, you may not make it through to the next batch. Again, imagine there's 100 letters coming in. How are they going to narrow it down to 20 or 25? And then how are you going to narrow it down to the whatever 10 or 12, depending on how the search is processed. So I'm going to encourage you when you write a letter, and this is my philosophy. I actually take language from the job ad and I put it right into the letter. I am applying for the position of XYZ at your institution, and a nice summary at the beginning. You can get a good template of a letter, um, and use that as a basis. And then in each section, your qualifications require someone with a PhD in X field. I have a PhD in such field. It may make your letter a little longer and it may feel like you're repeating yourself, but what I routinely see from search committees and hear from people is the people who write the letters that lay it out in the order of the application make it so much easier on the committee. Let me just check in. I can't see any of you except Jillian. Is this helpful so far? Am I talking about things that are useful for you? Thumbs up? Okay, that's good. So be specific and follow the letter. You cannot underestimate how fatigued reviewers get when they're going through these. And if they look at your letter and they say, oh my goodness, um, you know, Wesley Young, his letter, I'm just picking on you because I can see you on this call. His letter follows exactly the order. And guess what? Their checklist that they're going through maps onto the qualifications. It's the same order. Good. I'm glad that's useful, Dr. Young or Dr. Young to be. So spend time on your letter. And as you're doing that, research the institution, look at its strategic plan. What is this place after? I can tell you, if you apply to a place like Stony Brook and you don't talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, you're not going to get ranked as high because it's an institutional priority. You want to look at our websites and find out what do they care about aside from the qualifications of this job. Now, I'm just assuming you meet the qualifications at this point and you're, pardon me, my very senior dog is sneezing. What are we going to do when we don't get Zoom bombed by animals anymore, right? Our dog's barking. We'll hope she keeps quiet. She's very sweet and well behaved. I just lost my thread there for a minute. So let's assume you meet the qualifications. They want someone with a robust teaching portfolio and some research. Maybe that's more of a teaching job. Check, you meet that. You then want to go through and be able to lift your candidacy up a little bit higher through how you present yourself, and then be really prepared for the interview. So let's talk about that. Do a mock interview. Have people pretend to be individuals at that institution if you get an interview, and practice. And you can pretty much figure out what the questions are. Write them out. I mean, just Google typical interview questions. I mean, the first one I always ask, sometimes I wind up on these Zoom interviews with candidates for different jobs, like leadership jobs at Stony Brook, and we don't always have a set of questions. So the first one I will always ask is, tell me what attracts you to this position and what qualifications you bring to it. I mean, it's just a no-brainer. How do you approach teaching? What's been your most challenging research experience? What will your research trajectory here look like? You can anticipate what those questions are, and I encourage you to map them out with bullet points so that you're prepared, and then practice them. You're going to feel so much more fluent. And then, of course, can I see a thumbs up? Do you do practice job talks in your department? Do you know if your department or school or program? Yeah, take advantage of that. And I'm going to put on my Alan Alda Center hat here. You want to balance between being conversational and fluent in your discipline, because you may very well have, if you can find out who's on a search committee, you may very well have people in the room who are not specifically from your discipline but are weighing in. So the more you can understand, and you can ask the search committee chair, who's going to be there? Who am I speaking to? And tailor your talk once you get in the room. Okay, that's a little bit about the process. I'm happy if anybody wants to follow up with me. Don't hesitate. I'm my own worst enemy. I generate a lot of email for myself, but it's laura.lindenfeld@stonybrook.edu. I'm actually going to put that in the notes here because I love UC Davis and I want to help you all land a great job. And I want you to put your fear aside, because your fear of not getting a job is going to get in the way of you getting a fabulous job. I think you should be proud of the institution you come from and trust that your advisors are setting you up for success. And it's really the people, there's a sense of alignment in interviews you get with candidates. And sometimes I think people hold themselves back too much because they're maybe afraid of being too personable. A lot of places are looking for a great colleague. I know that when I hire, that comes into play. Is this person going to be a productive member of this unit, of this school? Are they going to help the graduate students and students? Are they going to support each other? Is this someone we can put on university wide committees? So please don't forget that part. It really, really matters. And then before I go to this next piece, because I'm going to talk to you about negotiating, because I think that often gets dropped. You want to think about, is this a place you want to be? You may be getting you may be looking at a place that you think on paper looks great, and you may be getting vibes that it's not. Do your homework and find out. You're interviewing them as much as they are interviewing you when you get to that point where you have an interview, and take that thoughtfully. I just happened to see a question pop up here. Would you advise applying for postdoc and faculty positions at the same time? Yeah, I think you want to get a great job. You want to get an entrance point. And I've actually had a couple of postdocs in the Alda Center who we've moved into faculty positions because they were so great. And really, that's in a way what happened with me, and it happened with my husband as well. So I would apply for positions that seem exciting and relevant where you feel like you can do good work. And then you're going to be able to present as someone who cares about the work and wants to move it forward.
Laura, if I may,
Yeah.
there was also a question above that from Carly. Can you walk through the steps to get a professorship at a major research university starting at graduating a PhD?
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, let's differentiate fields that require a postdoc and fields and Jillian, thank you, because like, boy, a lot of these came in. So please interrupt me.
No worries.
I'm from New York, you know. um, so my field didn't typically have postdocs, so I applied directly for a faculty position. And I'll tell you, like in my school, we tend to look at people who haven't had a postdoc in communication and journalism because it's not as standard. So, what are the steps to get a professorship at a major research university? Research. You have to have a strong research trajectory. And I think, I like to see what I'll tell you what I see when we put out positions in my school. And we are not the most research intensive of the schools and colleges at Stony Brook. But we see people who may have had experience as a faculty member somewhere else. And honestly, our new provost, one of his strategies is to say, we should be looking at institutions where there are research rock stars, and maybe maybe the institution isn't ranked as high as we are, but this is someone who's really honed their skills and is dynamic, has strong teaching experience, and really rocks with research where they can come in and hit the ground running. So that it's not like you're just going to come out of grad school and you're either going to get that job at an AAU or not. There are different ways to get into a research institution, but by all means, you want to have as many solid publications in the pipeline as possible. So I have this 3-part thing, and you've probably heard this from your own advisors. You want one in press, one under review, and one under development, at least at all times, so that you have something to talk about what's coming out, what's going through the review process, and what you're working on. And that's really where your research has been, where it is now, and where it's headed. And that's what's going to get you that job at a research institution, is that you fit. And then I would say, look for departments at research universities that are looking for someone like you. If they already have, it's like, let's say it's an English department and they already have a Shakespearean scholar, they're probably not going to need another one unless they have like an endowed chairship or an area where they're really trying to grow that particular part. Does that help to answer that question, Carly? Is that helpful? So that being said, the more you can show that you're able to help develop resources in the form of grants and that you have teaching, I think teaching matters more and more. And I like that. I've personally seen some of the strongest, most prolific researchers are also great inspirational teachers. And I think a lot of institutions are looking at that intersection. But then you need to look at the institutional type and see, places like Princeton, they have very small undergraduate programs. Stony Brook has 27,000 students, of which I think 11,000 are grad students. Don't quote me on that, but it's a big undergraduate population. Um, so look at that institutional type and make sure that the way you've prepared yourself and the career that you want to advance aligns with them. All right. Can we talk about negotiation for a minute? Because I'm going to assume we're talking about the job market, not just what's out there, but you getting a job. Learn how to negotiate. If you can sign up for a workshop and practice, I think that being able to negotiate also helps you not just negotiate a salary and research space, whatever it is you need, but I think it also helps you articulate better who you are and what you bring to the table. And when you're looking at an institution like a major research university and wanting a job there, you can start to think about with negotiation training how you articulate yourself in such a way as a good fit for that institution and department. I'd also say look at the org charts. This is a little bit boring, but find out where a department sits. What college or school is it in? Does it answer to which dean? What other units are there? Who's recently made tenure? What does their portfolio look like? What might they have looked like? You can look and see when someone came in and see more recent assistant professors. So let's say, Jillian, let's pick sociology. You could look and see at a given institution who was recently hired and look at their CV online. And you could see what they had published or were in the process of publishing when they came in. That gives you a little bit of a benchmark for what they might be looking for. Let me see. To what degree can you negotiate a postdoc position? Actually, that's a really interesting question. Sometimes you can negotiate a postdoc for a year and then start up on faculty. I've seen that happen where they might bring someone in and say, we want you to be on faculty, but you might be finishing up a dissertation and you might need a little time to get a few papers out. I've actually seen that happen a couple of times. Um, and I think, postdocs, you can look at where large institutional grants are being funded. So I had worked on some NSF grants at University of Maine that were like these $20 million 5-year grants, and these grants would get funded and then they'd need to hire postdocs really fast. So you might look at where there are new grants getting funded, where they're going to need people in your field as postdocs quickly. And you might then reach out to the PI and say, I'd be interested. That's a little different than just going in blind with a submission. And by the way, when you go to your annual conferences or whoever you're networked with, work that room, virtual or real, make the connections. You want to get people excited about the idea that you could potentially be working with them as a postdoc or faculty member. Does that help with that question? Okay, so negotiation. Don't ever accept the first offer they give you. I actually get really heartbroken and disappointed, especially with women who say, okay, I'll take that offer. I'm like, no, you won't. You want to go back and counter me. Don't be afraid of coming back and saying, I'd like to revisit the salary. I feel that that's a little low. And then you be quiet and wait. And then someone like me is going to say, well, we could go up a little bit because at the point where you're getting a job offer, we've decided it's you. We've looked at those 100 applications. You've gone through all these interviews and we're afraid we're going to lose you. So negotiate, learn how to negotiate, and it's going to make you a better applicant. I would do that. I would start doing that earlier rather than later. Let me see. You mentioned networking. Can you say more about networking? How important different strategy? Sure. So how many of you go to your national organization's annual conference? Can I see a thumbs up? How many of you participate? Like whether it's AGU or, yeah, you should be getting to those conferences. Go see some of the high profile papers, go to the networking events, and talk to people. This is where being a little shy can get in your way. You want to get out there and start meeting people and talking with them. I think it's actually a really critical part of the job market, because if someone takes a shine to your research and your portfolio, they may be able to help you navigate the job market at their institution or at another institution. They may, Jillian, I love the mentoring program that you've set up, because I think mentorship really does help people land in the right institution. You know, I may know of a good place for someone and be able to open a door and say, hey, you should really talk to this person. I think they'd be of interest to you. Um, so I also think some of the regional conferences, or thematically smaller, depending on your discipline, there are sometimes summer workshops, or like I was in National Communication Association and we'd have these summer workshops for doctoral students. And let me tell you, I know those people because we spent a week together on the coast of Maine. And then you had 5 or 6 faculty members in that space with you, helping you be like, wow, this would be a good job for you. So I think it does get down to that level. Also, don't be afraid to reach out to faculty and say, you're working on this, I'm working on that. Maybe we could work on a paper together. And the more you work with someone, the more they get to know you and they can help then advocate or serve as a reference for you outside of your own institution. It's a little bit field dependent. I understand, because if you're in a lab, you're working in that lab. That being said, ask your major advisor PI if they can connect you with people at institutions, if they can take you around and introduce you at conferences so you get to know people who may be a good connection directly for a job or indirectly be able to help you.
Laura, before we get to the next question in the chat, I see a hand raised from, and forgive me if I mispronounce your name, Kaisen. Feel free to pronounce my pronunciation or to correct my pronunciation. But Kaisen, you can go ahead and unmute.
I'm sorry, I don't have a question. I just raised my hand saying I participate the conference.
Oh, okay, sorry.
As long as your mic is on, have you networked with people at conferences? Have you found that helpful?
Yeah, before I was just a PhD student, so I mainly network with other students. But now as a postdoc, I guess since this year, I might start to talk with other professors, like faculty members at other institutions. So to see,
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. I do think one of the things that's lost in the Zoom world is the social dynamics of these conferences, where you really get to know people better. Have a business card with you so you can hand it to people.
Yeah.
Find a way to follow up with them. If you have a really nice conversation, like if I met you at a conference and we made a connection, you could follow up with me and you could say, hey, that was a great conversation. Or if you're applying for a job at Stony Brook and you want to follow up with me, do it and say, hey, I'm applying in chemical engineering. Do you know anybody there? Of course I do. I know people all over this campus. So avail yourself of those connections. I like to be able to connect people. Not everybody does. You have to know people's temperament. But if you have a connection at a particular institution or in a field, and volunteer for things. Sometimes service, we talk about servants as, oh, that's going to derail your progress toward research. Not necessarily. It can actually help elevate it. So I think I'm recommending you be very strategic, both about how you set up your portfolio and how you present yourself.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So is it easier to get a faculty job in teaching colleges? Did you see that one, Jillian, or was there another one?
No, that's the one that I saw.
It depends on how good of a teacher you are. If you don't love teaching and you're a terrible teacher, it's going to be hard. I think I'm going to encourage you to really dig deep. I think I'm not surprised at your questions about your worries about the market. Let's be realistic. Higher ed's in a fairly rough time, but what industry isn't? Honestly, we do really well in recessions if you look at the data on enrollment management. If you really want a job in higher ed and you're doing what you need to do to build your CV, you're going to get a job. If you want to go to a teaching college, then make sure you do. Back when I was a grad student, young whippersnapper, we had the program in college teaching at UC Davis. Do you still have some kind of pedagogy training? What's it called, Jillian?
The Center for Educational Effectiveness.
Yeah, do a
Yeah.
certificate. I mean, all this stuff. Try to get a teaching award. Co-teach something novel. Be innovative. Guest lecture in classes. That's another thing you can do is guest lecture at someone else's campus, and you start to build up a reputation for being a really great colleague who's willing to share and collaborate. I can't tell you how far that goes. A reputation of someone who's a team player. Because guess what? When you get to a campus, even a top notch research campus where you have to run a lab, you get a reputation for being a team player. And then you get tapped for weird jobs like, I guess I'm a team player because I keep getting tapped for for jobs in administration, but I'm kind of drawn to that. So you have to know yourself and what you're interested in. If you love teaching and you're dedicated to it, and maybe you write a pedagogy paper or two. I've done that. I loved teaching. That's going to help you land a job in a teaching college. If you're really, really invested in running a lab, you want to write NIH grants or NSF grants, you're ready on that trajectory, it jazzes you. You can't imagine not doing it. I think you're going to wind up in a job like that. You've got to follow your passion. I think we get in trouble when we convince ourselves we have to take a certain career path because it's the only option. So, I'd encourage you, as much as I'm saying be strategic and apply for jobs for which you're qualified, they're not going to look at you. You're not going to make it to an interview if you don't, but you might put out some applications for jobs for which you're qualified, but you're not certain if you would like them or not. And then that also kind of takes the pressure down on having to get that job. And you can really be present and in the moment with that process. And people feel that and they read it in your letter. Um, let's see, what else do we have here? I don't
There are a
know.
couple more teaching focused. So the first one that came in was if I do not research that much, but I like teaching and connect students with industry and practical skills, do teaching colleges want people like this?
Yes, I want people like that. I mean, we're having these strategic budget. I'm just going to give an example out of my own world. The Stony Brook world right now is looking at what we're going to do with continuing professional and executive education. And they're talking about creating a whole new unit that's aligned with industry and practical skills. They're going to need to hire people to do that, well-paying jobs. I mean, I'll tell you, in the Alan Alda Center, I don't have tenure stream jobs in the Alan Alda Center. Have a really dynamic, interesting faculty. Uh, I've had a number of people approach me and say, "Could I be a postdoc with you?" And I've managed to bring some people in on postdocs who were just so committed to doing this work, and then they were able to find their way into a tenure track job, which is really neat if that's what you want. But oh yeah, I think if you look at labor market trends for higher education, if you look at workforce trends, take a look at this Future of Work report. I don't have it handy right now, but what are the skills and qualifications people are going to need to thrive in the workforce in the future? You could wind up with a very interesting, productive career teaching professional skills at an institution and having a nice salary and a really rewarding career opportunity. So don't discount that. There's a lot of ways to get involved at a research university that are not running a lab on the traditional tenure track and find them very rewarding. Does that help to at least address that? Look outside the box, in other words, and again, tap into what do you love to do? How do you like to spend your time? Turns out I love to spend my time solving problems. So there I am in the provost's office solving problems. I never would have dreamed that in my entire life, that I'd be a dean and a vice provost. Who knew? Let's see.
Our next question is, if I want to get a primarily teaching focused job, should I prioritize learning how to write grants or getting to be an instructor of record for a big intro class?
I think I would primarily want to make sure that I know how to teach different types of classes and can speak fluently about that. If I were you, I'd try to get a teaching grant, because then you're showing, how much you really care about teaching and that you're willing to bring in resources to try to do it better. Here's another thing for people who are really interested in teaching, which I've seen many people really fulfilled by teaching focused careers is there are these centers for teaching and learning all over the country who need people with deep expertise in pedagogy and content area expertise. Um, start doing some additional, think about the bullets that go on your CV. What do you know how to do? Do you know how to do online curriculum design for asynchronous classes? Do you know how to do experiential learning? Do you know how to set up service learning classes? And then you could maybe publish something about that, what you've done, what you've achieved. There's pedagogy journals, and that just lifts you above the crowd of the person who's only taught chemistry 101, for example. So dig in and get that expertise. Apply for fellowships, teaching fellowships at UC Davis. I know they had them when I was there. I had a chancellor's teaching fellowship, which was a life-changing experience. It was really wonderful.
If I can ask a very quick follow-up question to that, what are teaching grants?
Oh, so there might be grants like from the US Department of Education or foundations. I'm just going to talk off the top of my head. Like you might look at the Ford Foundation and see, are there grants that they have about integrating DEI into more traditional science classrooms or something where you could both participate in and study that process? So I would just be looking around, what kind of resources are out there? There might be donors, individual funders who want to see certain characteristics be brought to bear in pedagogy. So be creative and look. It's almost like you mind map what could possibly be out there where I could up my skills, add some qualifications to who I am and what I do, so that when I present myself, I've got this really exciting work to talk about that's enriched who I am and what I do. That help?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
So we've got a sizable list now of questions. I'll continue reading them in the order that they came in. But so I've heard that having a few grants with you will increase your chance to get a faculty position these days. Is that true?
I think so. I do. I mean, the way that I phrase it, because I can't always require that someone have had a grant of their own, although there's grad student grants you can go for, or as a postdoc. We look for people who have vested interest in fundraising. I think I would be working with major professor or others in my area if they're writing a grant, if you could help co-write, so you learn how to do that. How do you write specific aims for NIH? How do you write broader impacts for NSF? What does an NEH grant look like? Take workshops so that you can show you've participated. It's very unlikely you'd come out of a PhD with an NSF grant of your own, because you're not allowed to PI until you have a certain title and status depending on the institution. But I think it can make a difference, especially in this funding climate, and depending on your field, it really might make a difference. That's where you need to do your homework and find out, what do those start looking now. If you're going on the job market in 2 to 3 years, look at what those jobs require now and think about how you would set yourself up to be able to say, I meet that, and that criteria, and I exceed it. So that your CV just clearly demonstrates expertise in those areas. And look across 10 institutions of different types and see how those qualifications vary.
So our next question is, how should you acknowledge or spin the fact that you're exploring multiple career options?
I think that's something for you. I think when you apply for a job, you're applying for that job. So if you were applying for a job with me and you were like, I'm applying for the assistant professorship in data journalism, I want to know that you want that job. But if you happen upon me at a conference and you say, I'm really curious about different career paths, then let's have that conversation. But when you write that letter to that job. Otherwise, you sound less interested. So I think there's a difference between being an applicant and seeking mentorship and guidance. I think it's great to go to leaders in your field, colleagues, and share that you're exploring different options. How do people think about that? You can even structure it as a series of interviews. Like, I don't mind if people approach me and say, hey, can I talk to you about science communication and where it's headed as a field? I've done a lot of conversations like that, and it's led to some collaborations, which is really neat. And that opens up doors.
So thank you, Wesley, for co-signing on the teaching. So that was adding to a previous question about small teaching colleges like people who teach. And so the next question is on teaching colleges as well. So staying in that same theme. I've never been in a teaching college before. How could I know more about it and decide whether it's something I like? In my field, R1 university tenure track positions is best and is set to be the goal for PhDs, but I'm not sure about it. I'm wondering how I can best figure out, or how I can figure out what my trajectory should be.
Yeah. So first of all, R1s do have teaching positions. You know, and there's tenure processes at some R1s where you have a lower percentage of research and a higher. So it's not just a cut and dry one or the other. One thing, Yijing is your name. Depending on where you live, you might consider, now do this carefully, do this with caution, and I don't want to overstep on what your what your doctoral advisor would say, but you may test drive teaching a class at a teaching institution as an adjunct and see how you like it. It's worth a try. If it doesn't interfere with your trajectory, because a good dissertation, what a good dissertation is a done dissertation. Get your dissertations done. It took me too long. I had a baby first and then a dissertation. Not that that's a problem. I had the dissertation done a month after he was born, but there's something to be said about getting that dissertation done and making sure it's set up so you can get papers and or a book out of it. Be thinking about that strategically. That's part of your CV is a reflection of what you've accomplished. It's not something made up. So think about how you want to represent what you do and what you care about as you do the work.
So we probably have time just for a couple more questions. So I don't know if this is precisely a job market question, but I enjoy teaching and I like to think I'm good at it. How do I balance this with the fact that my PhD is ultimately a research degree and I probably won't see a direct benefit from my teaching until after I graduate?
I mean, every PhD is a research degree. I think this is a matter, I want to make sure I understand this question. You enjoy teaching. I think then do some teaching. I don't think I think we think about those as separate buckets. And I see some of these incredibly productive researchers being brilliant teachers. And by the way, I think mentoring doctoral students, which has been one of the highlights of my own career, I have to say, of all the things I miss being in administration, I really miss having a team of doctoral students and postdocs to brainstorm with. That's a form of teaching as well. And you might find over your career that you go through different phases where I used to love teaching huge undergraduate classes, and then I loved teaching seminars. And I was telling Jillian before, I got really burnt out on grading. And then I found I really loved mentoring. And now I love working with colleagues and helping. I love getting new tenure stream faculty onboarded and helping them set themselves up. I love helping them write grants. So it's not an all or nothing. I realize that doesn't exactly answer your question, but I think if you feel intrigued by an activity and you're drawn to it and you think you can contribute it, try it out and make it part of who you are. Because if you suppress that, if you go into a lab and you write grants and it's not what you want to do, you're going to burn out. Not that that's not bad to do for a while, but I think the more you're true to your own self and what drives you and motivates you, I'm happy to take on, this is the bane of my own existence. My husband tells me, stop. I'm happy to take on extra work because it energizes me. So I tend to do a lot. And it doesn't mean other things necessarily suffer. It just means there's more joy to go around and less weekend. So I try these things out, experiment a little, not at the expense of completion or getting done what you need to get done, but stay true to your own needs and instincts, and you're going to flourish in your careers, and the worry about the job will go down. It really will.
Thank you. And I want to thank Megan also for mentioning the Future series and also dropping a link in there. So it looks like that series helps exploring non-academic options. So thank you, Megan. So I don't see any other questions. More folks thanking you, Laura, for the good advice.
I wish I could meet all of you. This would be fun in person. Online.
Maybe we have time for just one last question. If anyone has one burning question that they'd like to ask before we officially close out.
You want to hear how to find out about salaries?
I think that'd be great.
So in a state institution, you can actually look and see what the starting salaries are. And I actually have negotiated my way up quite significantly by looking at comparable salaries and coming back and put it in writing. When I got the job at Stony Brook, I almost turned it down because the salary was so low. And then I did my homework. And once I put it in writing, it was on a state email. And the person hiring me was obligated to go to HR and follow through. So don't be shy to do I was a little more advanced. I was full professor at that point, but do a comp analysis. They're gonna go slightly below, unless someone says to you, I'm offering you exactly what I can offer. I cannot offer more. I don't want you to have to negotiate because I really want to bring you here. This is the best I can do. Then you know what you do? You say, okay, let's talk about a semester not teaching, or let's talk about additional lab space, or how about some summer salary or a grad student, and you find other pieces to negotiate. But please don't ever accept the first offer someone gives you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lindenfeld. I really appreciate your presentation today. Thank you everyone for joining us. I want to say our next session is actually with Dr. Alice Fitzpatrick, and we'll be talking about jobs outside of the academy. So it's a nice accompaniment to today's presentation. So I appreciate you all coming and joining us today. I will be sending an email to the students on the call, just confirming your entry into the drawing for the gift cards that we have associated with this series, and also a link to an evaluation. So thank you again, and I hope to see many of you at our next presentation next Tuesday. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Take care. We got it. So it's just the three of us.